So this is a new spread. It's not really a spread. It's just a reading sort of thing. Oracle cards. This is the care and feeding of your muse. What is your muse hungry for? What sort of fuel for fire is your muse and or muses? You might have more than one. Hoping for. I'm using the Literary Witches Oracle, the Art Oracles, Music Oracles, Trust Your Vibes by Sonia Choquette, the Unicorn Oracles, and then some of my crazy little hand-done cards. We have the Rorschachs, the Muses, the original Tiny Blink, I don't know, whatever they are. And then, let's start with these little guys first. Okay, so we have Integration, Cinema, and Experiment. Let's knock some stuff off the table. That's okay. Okay, now do I want to put everything out on the table first? Or... I think I kind of do. Psychogenic maladies. What is not negotiable? Microbiome. I'm just going to stack these on top of each other in the analyzer. Okay, so these are more sort of like environmental slash physical slash personality thingy things. What do we have for the muse? Okay, we have Get Cozy, Ask Your Guides, Sweetest Taboo, Ragmop, Daydream, Sympathy for the Devil, Prime the Well, and Use Your Illusion. Then for the Rorschach ones, stop overthinking the bad shit and do it. Unicorns, Leadership, Witches Oracle, The Moon, Emily Bronte, Emily Dickinson. 2 Emilys. What are the chances? Or as most people would say, you can't make this up. Actually, well, I couldn't, but back to basics for Sonia Choquette's card. Lou Reed, Music Oracle, and 4 for the Art Oracles. We have Caravaggio, Sophie. Let me look up how to say her name. I don't want to mangle people's names here. My first impulse is to say CALE because it's CALLE, and that would be... It is CALE. Okay, Sophie Kee, which is... She was born in France, but I'm using the Spanish pronunciation. Doesn't matter. Okay, let's look up Albrecht again. Albrecht drew her, which is a neat pronunciation for an artist, and Diane Arbus. Okay. So... let's start off with the Art Oracle, since they're right here on top. Diane Arbus. Look directly at whatever you're avoiding. The bullseye is always in the margins. Listen when a city tells its secrets. I'm going to go through all of them and then hit them one at a time. Albrecht drew her. One man's outbreak is another man's breakthrough. It's timely. Know your perspective. An apocalypse, Ben. Sophie Kee. Put on a good show for their surveillance cameras. Distance makes the heartbreak stronger. Invade neighboring states of privacy. And Caravaggio. Try to keep violence metaphorical. Adjust your eyes to darkness. A head on the shoulders is worth 2 in the hand. A lot of decapitations in his work. For the music oracles, we have Lou Reed, I Think of You, But Not That Often. Survive Your Own War. Learn to walk hand in hand with magic and loss. So, with Lou Reed, the first thing I think of is Walk on the Wild Side and Velvet Underground. And then I think of Andy Warhol, and I think of Songs for Drella, which is an album that Lou Reed did with John CALE for Andy. Drella was his nickname. Kind of, it was a combination, I think, of Dracula and Cinderella. One thing that stands out about Lou Reed is that while we think of him as being a musician, and many consider him a pioneer in the music world, it wasn't always that way for him, and he was flexible because he actually, before he became known in music, and I think maybe, I have no idea the time frame, but I just know the story is that he used to also pose for tabloids, and his picture would be used as like, this guy was a serial killer, and so he would be like the sort of the stock photo guy that would be representative of, you know, the more unsavory types in society for the tabloids to sell papers. So I guess nowadays they'd call that shape-shifting, but back in the day they probably just called it survival. The I Think of You But Not That Often, it sort of speaks to his stance of, at least to me in this reading, sort of a standoffishness. But when we get down to Magic and Loss, that album was about people in his life that he cared about deeply and had lost. And so the standoffish exterior conceals or concealed, since he's no longer with us, a softer interior. Wouldn't be surprising to me if his sign was Cancer, or if he had Cancer somewhere in his chart. That hard exterior, but it's concealing and armoring, like the meaty center. And Survive Your Own War kind of echoes that a little bit. So I think in this instance, he's kind of here to say that, you know, you can maintain your toughness, but make sure to keep that tenderness inside alive, because that's part of what is going to help your muse stay, you know, real and healthy and organic, and not turn into something plastic and completely foreign. Even though often, and especially nowadays, it's more of an inclination for most people to be guarded. To let things in for your muse, you kind of have to maintain a softness somewhere. Caravaggio, try and keep violence metaphorical. Adjust your eyes to darkness, and a head on the shoulders is worth two in the hand. So, ran out of room on the phone, but gave me time to look up Caravaggio to get some more information for you. And it says, by today's standards, Caravaggio would have needed a medical diagnosis. A genius, he was also belligerent and homicidal. His frequent travels were due to law evasion, not wanderlust. Plague left him a young orphan. Immense talent won him high society's patronage. Like his life, his paintings are passionate and bloody contrasts, light and dark, innocence and brutality, with lots of severed heads. An example of this is David with the head of Goliath. Another is Judith beheading Holofernes. While killing it professionally, I see what they did there, Caravaggio literally killed a pimp. He then made his final masterpieces as a fugitive, and died shortly after being jumped by vengeful assailants who busted his face and eyesight. Classic Caravaggio. and Italian, 1571 to 1610. Not a terribly long life, but a very colorful one. And very compatible with Lou Reed, because there's a bit of duality with Lou, with the hard exterior, soft interior, and Caravaggio is a study in contrasts as well. And I think in this reading speaks to accepting the shadow in yourself and the light and letting them coexist. Because it, you know, on one hand, he can be considered, you know, there's very colorful language in here. He can be considered a genius and immensely talented and passionate. And then on the other hand, he's described as a fugitive and belligerent and homicidal. And that's definitely, you know, a beautiful example of light and dark in the same person, and probably how people viewed him depended a lot upon what they already carried within them and brought to the experience of meeting or knowing him. You know, he could be interpreted as being amazing, and those, you know, other qualities, the darker qualities, could be considered part of the, you know, part and parcel of the what you get in a deal with an artist, you know. Or had the art part of it could be completely ignored, and people could tiny lens him as just being a nut or a problem for society or what have you. But he's actually a full person. And so accepting the light and the dark kind of opens you up to being able to sense what fuel is going to feed your spirit, because you're not automatically cutting things out that might be inspiring simply based on the fact of they're either too light or too dark. You're sort of able to jump back and forth between extremes, which can be very informing and inspiring. Sophie Kee did a lot of sort of undercover, I guess you could say, or I'm just going to let the book say it, because she's an interesting one. I know that one thing she did is she had gotten a rejection letter from a guy, and she let like 100 women interpret it as an art project. Her media include photography, text, video, voyeurism, oversharing, and unlawful invasions of privacy. In one of her first projects, The Sleepers, she found 23 people to sleep continuously in her bed in consecutive 8-hour sessions that included them being photographed and interrogated. For The Shadow, circa 1981, she had her mother hire a private detective who surreptitiously followed Kee, unaware that she was aware. In Address Book, 1983, Kee called strangers from a found address book, asking about its owner, and publishing the transcripts as part of an imagined portrait of the man, who found out and freaked out. And for her 2007 Venice Biennale exhibition, Take Care of Yourself, Kee, I'm sure I mangled that last word, asked 107 women to interpret a breakup letter she received. So she was born in 1953 in France. And so a big part of her is like bringing the shadow, or in this case, like the unseen, out into the open, and pretty much like the deeply unseen, the things that most people would prefer not to look at or have known. And whatever your position on the use of that, especially in a world like we live in today, where so much of everything that everyone does is public, whether or not it's interesting or it's important or it's fulfilling. That's kind of an interesting contrast with hers, which sort of seems to go to the marrow of core things in us. You know, a breakup letter, and having women interpret that. Or waking people up and interrogating them while they're sleeping in her bed. There's like, her work pokes at places where our core sort of courses through. These like sort of, in Reiki they call it like the main energy lines in our body are called meridians. And it kind of reminds me of that. They're like the main thoroughfares or highways, interstates that sort of our essence goes through. And so to have them poked and messed with is very provocative. And the thing about art is that it is meant to provoke, whether it provokes a positive response or a negative response. The whole job description is to elicit some sort of a response, which her work certainly did. It's not a work that just anybody would take on. It's a work that you would have to really have the mettle to follow through. But also, that said, it's clear that because this is the work that she chose and she did follow it through, that these issues and poking at these sort of meridian lines or superhighways within us, that we kind of exist in, for lack of a better term, that was something that was innate in her, and that it pretty much had to come out somewhere. So thank God that it came out in art, right? So a lot of this is about self-acceptance. And then there's also a great deal of it that it is about, it feels to me that it's about accepting those strange impulses. And a lot of times those strange impulses make other people uncomfortable. But that's a great sign of saying you're on the right track when you're creating something, because people get uncomfortable with things that they have not experienced before. So it lets you know that you're pioneering something. You're bringing something new into the world. Albert drew her. One man's outbreak is another man's breakthrough. Know your perspective. Apocalypse then. Of course, one man's outbreak is another man's breakthrough could be an obvious sort of nod to what we have all experienced with the pandemic, and how being isolated from typical norms of social interaction has forced us all to sort of be alone with our thoughts to a certain extent, with varying results. And certainly is a fertile ground for coming up with new ideas and for creating. Because if you're able to channel the things that you have to confront in such a period of isolation into art, you're getting like a really intensely concentrated version of things that come from the human experience that would be diluted if that restriction, that isolation, that was completely not part of how most people did things prior to the pandemic. If that extreme situation wasn't there, it kind of distills a lot of emotions, and I think that it probably brought up a lot of things quicker just because of small spaces for people. So it's just, yeah, it's really kind of just like a concentrated material to work with. The painter and engraver Albert Dürer, who awoke German Renaissance art, was foremost a printmaker whose woodcut illustrations of feel-good religious subjects, such as the apocalypse, accumulated a mainstream following previously unknown in the print biz. Durer ran with cool intellectuals and rural. My mouth is trying to say rural instead of royal. Let's try that again. Durer ran with cool intellectuals and royals in his hometown of Nuremberg. But during a plague outbreak, he allegedly pieced out to Venice, which he considered his spiritual homeland. An Italophile, Durer was so inspired and motivated by his southern colleagues that in later works he forced emotion and geometric perspective down the throats of his cold Deutsch countrymen. So, here's another person who is working sort of against the tide of the common perspective, the mainstream. And I think know your perspective becomes ever more important because his perspective was a more singular one. And when you don't have a lot of support for the way you see things, your fortitude and your certainty in what you want to achieve has to be very solid and strong, because there's nobody else to sort of prop you up. There's going to be lots of people to tell you every reason why your perspective is wrong. So it's very important that once you have your vision, you really hold on to it and don't let outside forces, change the direction of where you want to take that vision. Diane Arbus. Look directly at whatever you're avoiding. The bullseye is always in the margins. Listen when a city tells its secrets. She took pictures of very unusual members of society. And so some people were a little shocked by her pictures, but the look at directly at whatever you're avoiding is excellent advice, because that's what we fear when we confront it. We find that a lot of our fear comes from all of the information within whatever thing that is that we had no idea about. And once we find that information out, even if it's not pleasant information, it can actually help dampen that fear and bring it down, just because a lot of fear is a lack of information, a lack of clarity, vagueness. Because if you know what's coming, then it's easier to accept. But if you have no idea, then you're sort of all over the place. But she began as a commercial and fashion photographer with her then husband Alan, but she was always more interested in the fringes. Wandering New York's morgues and forgotten corners, Arbus saw her light in the city's shadows. After separating from Alan, she made a name for herself taking head-on photographs of people in the margins, the so-called ordinary freaks, outsiders, and society's castaways. She took her own life in 1972 and remains as controversial and influential now as she was in her lifetime. She was born in 1923, so she lived from 23 to 71. That's the embracing of the shadow again. And the bullseye is always in the margins, is talking about sort of like the path that's not well trodden, the one that's unexpected. The one that you miss if you don't pay attention. And a city telling its secrets is observation, because we can gloss over so much just because we see it all the time, and we sort of shorthand it and don't really look at it with fresh eyes. And so a lot of information is so disregarded that it almost becomes like a secret, simply because there haven't been the appropriate eyes there to observe it. So I like that this is the I statement too. Keep your eyes open and try and clear out your perspective now and again to sort of get sort of hit the reset button in whichever way you find that comfortable, whether it's like an energy clearing thing, or it's getting exercise, or it's completely, vegging out for a day and just watching whatever you feel like, watching on TV, just mindless things, or anything that makes you feel sort of refreshed. A long bath, a weekend in another part of town, or a picnic, or anything to sort of break up whatever momentum you've got going for long enough that when you come back to your regular environs, you can almost see them with fresh eyes and see what you may have missed. So, for Sonia Choquette's card, we have Back to Basics. And that talks about the importance of literally feeding your muse. If you're exhausted, if you're dehydrated, if you're malnourished, or just, peckish, if you've got a lot of pent-up energy or a lot of stagnant energy because you haven't been moving around a lot, all of these things can impact not only the way that you feel and your basic systems and all that, but your ability to hit the reset button, see things with fresh eyes, or dig deeper into something. It can affect your ability to embrace the shadow when you want to, or when that's needed in your work, because you're just so bogged down with these physical needs that your tolerance decreases. So your emotional reactions to subject matter that you may have previously jumped into eagerly to dissect, it could you could wear yourself down to a point where those things seem too strong for you to deal with, or overwhelming, or not appropriate. And so not taking care of those basic needs that you have, bodily and mentally and so forth, it will bleed over into everything, including what you want to create. The unicorn card is leadership. Step into your leadership. Share your message. Inspire and empower others. This is saying that whatever it is that you have to say, in whatever medium you have to say it in, it's important. It's something that other people need to experience, whether their reactions to it are positive or negative or somewhere in between or fluctuating, whatever the case. Your muses want to be fed because they got a lot to say. They've got a lot to put you to the task on too. And I guess that's why we've got do it here. So if you have been considering an idea and you're reticent about jumping in, take that as a hint and stop overthinking the bad shit. Because apparently there's a tendency to get locked in the mental space and analyze before moving with ideas that you're impassioned about. So finding a little wiggle room in that and saying it's okay to experiment. It doesn't have to be for keeps. It can just be like this reading. This reading is an experiment. But I get locked in that whole situation too of needing to plan it all out in your head. But yet, if you try and plan it out on paper after all that thought, you find, wait, I don't actually know what the concrete action steps are. because it gets locked in that mental space, and you become so used to dealing with it in that mental space that it's hard to get it on legs to stand on actual land. Microbiome it sort of refers back to the back to basics thing of our gut health affects our mental health and our physical health. And so you got your little stomach critters asking you for something tasty. I think that fiber gummies are something that they like. There's inulin, which I can't tell you what that is. I just remembered that that was what is in those things that they enjoy. But keeping the friendly bacteria in your gut healthy helps keep your brain healthy and helps keep you on your clear who you are path, instead of getting distracted by imbalances in your system, which we can often mistake to be personal problems, and they're not. They're just, we need to improve our diet or get more sleep or what have you. What is non-negotiable? What is absolutely integral to your well-being, to your feeling of motivation and drive, to your passion, to what inspires you, what makes you want to get up in the morning. If you don't have a sort of sense of looking forward to things, then it's very difficult to feed your muses and have them generate inspiration for you. Because again, you're going back to like basic needs, only not negotiable. It goes far past just physical or systems, or, it speaks more to what core things do you need so that you feel aligned, so you aren't focusing on what's out of place, but you're focusing on what you actually want to do. Psychogenic maladies. When we get imbalanced, whether it's mentally or physically or alignment-wise with how we interact with our environment and the people and things in it, a lot of times things can present themselves physically that won't be diagnosable if you go to the doctor and have it checked out. But there'll be persistent problems. And in Reiki, they say that it's stuck energy. Basically, energy gets blocked, going, I guess, traveling along the meridians. In psychiatry, they call it psychogenic maladies. An example would be seizures, but there's no like aberrations on an EEG that would indicate there's a problem. The MRI looks fine. There's no like environmental factors that could be causing some sort of a reaction. They just are there. Or I had an instance where I was legit projectile vomiting for like weeks, and went to see a therapist finally, after not getting any sort of relief and basically like not being able to hold even water down for very long. And she said, you have just taken in so much garbage from life that your body is literally trying to cast it out of you. So there's a trauma book called The Body Keeps the Score, and I really believe in the work that the gentleman who wrote that has done, because it really does, when you have trauma, get stuck in you. And so that doesn't have to be like major trauma either. It can be if you have issues that you just haven't, like you have a really bad day and there's some messed up stuff that went on in that day, but you don't really address it. Instead, you just sort of push it down and say everything's fine, and you just kind of maintain because you're just trying to get through. but then it's still down in there. It's just covered up now with like a weighted blanket or a tarp or something where it's not accessible, and you're going to forget it's there underneath layer after layer of other things that come along and build up on top of it. So hitting that reset button and giving yourself a chance to cycle things out of you, you know, through things that you enjoy and through things like meditation and getting enough sleep and all of that, is only going to be helpful for your muses, because they want to use your illusion. Your perspective has little shiny toys hidden inside of it that other people, since they don't have your perspective, they don't have the same sort of like trappings of your dream world. And your dream world is apparently very rich, and it's one of the reasons why you probably spend a lot of time analyzing, because your dream life is so detailed that that same attention to detail, you can't help but pay it to everything. So the trick here is to not get overwhelmed by that detail, not to shorthand it, but to pick out the, I guess, the bigger parts of the landscape, and remember that they are as special as your voice. They are unique as your voice. They're familiar to you, the different symbols and themes and things that you hold in mind in your dream world. But they're just familiar to you, but to other people they're completely foreign and innovative. So remember that within things that you find to be sort of wispy and not really worth bringing to the table, there is very valuable stuff to bring to the table. It's just you're very familiar with it. Prime the well. You have to fuel yourself in order to be able to put things out. And that speaks bodily, but that also speaks to taking in art, taking in words, taking in conversations, taking in nature, taking in the whole rich tapestry of experience. So if you've been avoiding certain things, or if you've felt very closed off, the more avoidant you become for whatever reasons, some of which might be traumatic, some of which might just be being worn out, it's cutting off the fuel supply to your muses as well. Sympathy for the Devil talks about looking at the adversary's point of view and delving into why they have that point of view. What factors created that? So it speaks about origin stories, and it speaks about digging down to the roots of things. And I don't think, because, there's so much in here about the shadow anyway, I don't think that you would have a problem doing that. So it's more, I think, like a reminder to do that, even though sometimes that's part of what society doesn't want to hear, is that what they fear actually has a human side. Daydream, again, your illusions, your dreamscape is very important. And so your muses are asking you to indulge it and keep it more in the daydream world of things are possible and things can be decorated and propped up and good, as opposed to the over-analyzing aspect of the detail where things are taken apart and deconstructed and examined to see if they hold up or they don't. Ragmop, that's R-A-G-G-M-O-P-P. I have fun. Like, This specifically refers to singing a goofy song while you're mopping, but have fun even through the parts that are tedious, that are boring, that are not exactly the thing you feel inspired at that moment to do. Try and find a way to find the levity in them. Sweetest Taboo. Definitely speaking of the shadow side, and definitely saying that the taboo, who decides that? That's like a consensus opinion, largely of people that you don't know. Society, quote unquote, whatever. Sweetest. One person's taboo is another person's salvation. It all depends on the perspective. So, if there are things that you want to bring forth in your work that you are hesitant to bring forth because of societal taboos, this is basically trying to give you permission to cast that whole restrictive little corral aside and just embrace the ideas. You don't have to judge them. And you don't have to worry about how other people are going to judge them. Because if those other people were really the correct arbiters, they would also be artists. They're not. They're not going to bring forth anything if they're criticizing you. If they truly want to criticize, then they should do as Gogol said and create. Do it through creating. Or like Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. So if they don't like what you're doing, then they may certainly feel free to create their own art to put out into the world and let the public decide. But the public isn't your concern. What your concern is bringing forth your ideas the way they feel purest to you. Purity is subjective. Ask your guides. Now, you may be spiritual, and you may be in touch with spiritual guidance. So, if you are, that's what that means. If you are not, then you can look at this in one of two ways. As many as you want, actually, because you are the creator here, but I'm going to give you two ways. One way is you can look at it as your guides being your intuition and your gut. The other way you can look at it, every artist, creator, writer, actor, performer, whomever that you admire that is no longer on this planet is your guide. And the thought of their work, the memory of their essence is as much a spiritual guide to you as any guide that you could connect with. Because they're hoping that you carry on their work. And likely you have a very diverse list. And what fabulous combinations of influence you can draw from that. So you can think of it like that if you'd like. Get cozy. Be comfortable. The whole starving artist thing is romantic or whatever, but only if you're not actually a starving artist. If you're a starving artist, it's not my idea of romance, okay? It's important to be comfortable. It's important to be in a good space. And this includes like not only comfort, but like safety and freedom from distraction, freedom from interference, freedom from extra noise and bullshit, frankly. So you can look at it as being comfy while you're doing your work, and you can also look at it as giving yourself boundaries around your work to where once you're in there, you're in a safe space and you can really lose yourself in it instead of being yanked out of it periodically, randomly, by extra crap. Cinema is a suggestion of priming the well. To dig back into any genre, several genres, foreign, domestic, what have you, stuff that you haven't experienced. And sort of just strap in, open your eyes wide, go in with an open mind, and see what comes of it. Because exposing yourself to different directors, seeing the way that they frame their shots, seeing how they present information, and the little flourishes, the little liberties they take, the little moments of things that are unexpected, how those feed and add to the whole overall story. It's just, it's like when you speak to people and have a lot of conversations, and gradually you get more and more fluent in whatever language, or you get more adept at communicating what you want to communicate in a clear way. The same goes with cinema, as far as that visual sort of acumen and also inspiring emotional response. Because it'll stand out to you what you think is a good way to do that, and what you think is heavy-handed or not quite your style. You know, not all of us prefer a large orchestral swell when we're supposed to feel something, right? We like to sort of determine that on our own and have the background music a little more subtle. We don't like to be hit over the head with it. So that's something that I notice personally. So there will be things that you'll notice, and the more varied the cinema you take in, the more of a sort of pastiche of stuff you're going to get. Integration is, in this instance, like a compatibility between the light and the dark, that space in between those, if you want to consider them almost to be like hemispheres of the brain, because this is what this originally refers to, is when the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, the linear, logical, and the creative, more open, flexible, are able to communicate. That way our emotions can inform our mind, and our thought can inform how we feel. There's integration, but it can also speak to having that compatible space, I don't know, like a demilitarized zone in between the shadow and the light, you know, that coexistence. Letting those polarities have a symbiotic relationship that works for you, as opposed to them being opposed. Okay, finally we have the moon. And I've written all the little meanings from the book here because I like to not only go by what my intuition is, but know what specifically these cards were intended to say. The moon is typically illusions, secrets, mystery, and in this deck it's also surrender and looming change. So surrender to the mystery. Surrender to both the light and the dark sides of the moon. Those things that are worth digging after, worth going to the sort of the bad part of town in your head to ferret out. Because you can bring change to your work if you're brave enough to go there. which I feel you most definitely are. We have Emily Bronte with fantasy, hiding in fantasy, dwelling in fantasy, indulging in fantasy. Again, speaking to your rich dream life. And, you know, humoring yourself. You know, okay, I want to mess around with this idea, and it's kind of out there, and it's a little bit spooky, and it even makes me uncomfortable. Allow yourself to do that. Allow yourself to experiment with ideas that you normally may not embrace, just to see what happens. And then we have finally Emily Dickinson representing the soul, spiritual life, the inner world, and the unknown. And when Emily died, they found an untold number. Well, I mean, it's told. I just don't remember what the number is, so don't let me fool you. But a whole bunch, let's say, a whole meso poems that she had created and never shown to anyone. So she was very prolific and had an extremely rich inner world. And damned if that doesn't look like a ferret that she's holding. So she was used to sort of, you know, plumbing the miry depths, the untilled part of the soil, I guess. So, again, I think it's encouragement to don't be afraid to do that. Or be afraid, but do it anyway. Okay, well, I hope that this has been helpful. This has been a test drive of this Feed Your Muse reading, and as you can see, I paid extra special attention to making sure it's all spread out. No, I didn't, but I am working on that despite what this all looks like. Anyway, I hope this was helpful for you, and I am wishing you much love and light and creative fun. Use your illusions. Take care.